As Laura mentioned, this is accessible images when it matters most. Let me get my thing. I am your guide for today. My name is Carrie Fisher. I'm a senior accessibility consultant and trainer here at DQ Systems. When it comes to informing the public about critical health issues, timing is everything. The information you consume today could quite literally save your life tomorrow. And with more than 65% of the population being visual learners, meaning they learn and remember best through visual communication, the job of creating and sharing accessible images has never been more important. This is especially true for public service announcements. You'll hear me refer to them as PSAs, just to shorten it, aimed at providing crucial and urgent information to the public. But what happens when you have users who have visual impairments or dyslexia or cognitive disorders? How do they receive and understand this visual information? What elements make an image accessible or inaccessible? To help you produce more accessible images, today we're going to go over some different types of images, and there's corresponding messages, alternative text as we call it. Then we're going to dive into some real-world examples of inaccessible images and discuss which elements matter most when the critical messages need to reach these people. We're grouping them by color and contrast, typography and layout, and copy and icons. All right, first up, let's talk about the different types of images and how to provide alternative information about your images to your users. The World Health Organization estimates there are about 39 million people who are blind and about 246 million who have low vision worldwide. So in a total, that's about 285 million people who might be using an assistive technology device like a screen reader to understand your image. So this is a huge piece of your audience you're forgetting if you're not thinking about your image alt message. But before we get into the methods about how the message will be delivered, we need to take a step back before and think about the why of the image. So the first question I ask myself when I see an image, I ask, what's the purpose? Is it to enrich the content that is there? Or is it informational? Does it have its own message, right? And then I want to ask myself, what is the next step? What is the step I want to have the user take? Are they going to take an action, right? So you can see images that are buttons or links, right? Or are you just delivering a message? So you just want your user to receive it. And if you are sending a message, what type of message are you sending? Is it simple, complex, or emotional? By asking the questions, what type of message is this information trying to convey, and is the message simple, complex, emotional, or actionable, will help you determine how best to convey the information to a person using an assistive technology device. This is just a quick, simplified chart, but there's also some really great ones, like the WCAG has an image decision tree that I like to use a lot too. And these tools can help you decide which category your image belongs to. Or if decision trees are not your thing, then you could just imagine your image has vanished. Then you ask yourself, do I understand the content that remains? If the answer is yes, the image is decorative. If not, the image is informative and contextually necessary. So let's look at an example of a decorative image. In this example, we see a giant letter S and a drawing of a black cat with green eyes. This is called a drop cap, and it's made to make this article look a little bit more exciting and fun. But when we remove the drop cap illustration, what changes? Certainly there are visual differences, but no information is really lost. If we look at the code, in this drop cap example, we have both the ARIA hidden true and an empty null alt text. Those were used to hide the image from assistive technology devices. And while this particular redundancy is not necessary to make it accessible, it's also not harmful in this particular situation, since this div only contains the images we want to hide. If the div contained other things like action items or some information that we do want to expose to screen readers, I wouldn't recommend using ARIA hidden on that complete div. This is a good point to a good time to remind people that when it comes to accessible code, more is not always better. All right, so the big takeaway for decorative images, if you think that they are decorative, then programmatically the image needs to be hidden. And there are many ways to hide images, including using the empty or null alt text. So just pointing this out here, this is not to be confused with a missing alt attribute. So you have alt text, which is in the information you're conveying, and the alt attribute is the alt equals, right? So you want to make sure you always have that plus empty. So those are, the spacing is a little weird on this font, but those are basically both quotation marks with no space in between. Another way to hide decorative images is using ARIA. I've shown a couple of examples of ways that you can do it. Or you can use CSS background or icon font. So the first two methods send a signal to the AT devices to ignore the image as it is not needed to understand the content or action on the page, while the third message by default is just not shown to the AT device. So there's nothing you need to hide, it's just hidden. I have a little star here again, just pointing out again, ARIA hidden true. You wanna make sure it is a good option, but you have to be very cautious where you apply it because it removes the entire element from the accessibility API. So use with caution. Beyond programmatically hiding your image, there's not really a lot more you need to consider when it comes to decorative images. So if you're saying, but wait, what about X? Or how about Y? Then you might need to go back to the image decision trees and kind of reevaluate your image. It might not be 100% decorative after all. One of the most difficult types of images to categorize I've found is the emotional/mood. And that's based on images of the subtype. They're a little bit subjective. So what one person might consider decorative, another person might consider informative. So this might be a conversation you need to have with your team. Otherwise, just use your best judgment. It's an interesting side note that, I've talked to people who use screen readers and I asked them, would you rather have the information when in doubt or would you not? And honestly, it's like a personal choice. Some people want to hear everything. Other people say, yeah, if I don't need to know it, I'd rather not mess with the time and of listening to it. So really it's subjective all the way around. Okay, moving on from decorative, let's look at an informative image. An example of an informative image and this one is the DQ logo. It's up there on the top left. This is a screenshot of the home page. If we ask the same question as before, does the content or content change, context or content change when the image is missing? The answer is yes. We don't necessarily know what website we're on without that logo. In this example, the logo is both informative and actionable since it is both an image and a link. And again, if we inspect the logo, we can see it's an SVG and it's utilizing ARIA labeled by and a title. Plus, if you notice in there that the second element here is a screen reader span tag. It says SR-only. And in the CSS, there's some code that makes that invisible to the eye, but accessible to AT devices. So that's also another way I've seen content be exposed. But in this particular case, if we're using an AT device, we would actually hear a little bit of redundancy, I think. I think we'd hear DQ logo, which again is not bad. Just know that what you're getting. All right, so informative images, I broke it down into the IMG and the SVG just to kind of show a couple different differences, but for the most part, there are some overlaps. So AT devices, as we mentioned in the decorative, you have to hide it programmatically. And the same is true as if you want to show it, right? So for AT devices to understand the message or intent of an image, informative images must have programmatically discernible alternative text. Typically, this is accomplished by using image alt, like some description, right? So the reverse of what we just saw, we actually want info. And info in this particular case is just a stand-in for whatever you want to say. But there's also alternative ways to add this image information, including ARIA and HTML. And it really depends on the subtype and the context of your page, right? The image ARIA labeled by ID, just a reminder, that is connected to another element like a for element, which would explain more about what that information is. And sometimes I put HTML in here because I think sometimes people forget that that's really an option. This could be a visible text to everybody that could help other people with like cognitive issues or people who need just a little bit more information about the image. But also you could hide it from people who are using their site to see your site, but they can use their AT device to hear it. So again, there's a couple different options when it comes to HTML. So moving on, having that alternative text is great, but it's not enough. It also must be meaningful. For example, if your image is about feeling safe at home, but your alternative information says house, does that really convey the full message? So for more complex alternative text phrases, I like to conduct the telephone test. So if I called up, imagine that you call up your friend and you said the word snail, and then you hung up. Your friend would be maybe confused, but maybe think of a snail. But in what context? So you might be thinking about like just a normal little garden snail eating a piece of lettuce, or maybe it's like a psychedelic snail from the 70s, or the snail facial that I'm not sure if I would try or not. It looks a little slimy. Or maybe Gary the snail, right? It depends on, you know, the context, right? But if I just said snail, and trust me, I've seen plenty of images that like literally the alt is just one word. That's not very descriptive. But if I called my friend and said, the snail is eating my hydrangeas, that would paint a much more vivid picture without adding a lot of additional characters or effort, really. Of course, you know, don't go overboard. AT user will have to listen to your alternative text. They have the suggestion about cap it at about 150 characters. And if you need more than that, there's a lot of different ways to add more context. We talked about the SVG option, the HTML option. There's a lot of really great descriptive patterns or methods you could use to add more detail if you felt like you needed it. So that was you know, I'm like everybody else. I spent some time on image alts, but there is this like giant world beyond image alts. And I don't think people really kind of go there very often. I think when we think images, the first questions are almost always about alts. I want to challenge you to think beyond that. There is a world beyond image alts. So it's important to note that image alt text is important and addresses the needs of screen reader users or AT users. But a lot of people with disabilities do not rely on screen readers. They might use other AT devices like browser resizing, customized style sheets, magnification software, right? A lot of options to help them see what is on the screen. To these people, that screen reader output is probably not as important to them as other image elements like color, contrast, typography, layout, copy, and icons, which is what we're focusing on today. All right. So before I do the notes on this one, this is actually a PSA from the United Nations. And you guys can guess in the chat what you think it is. I'll tell you at the end of this little section. But so let's look beyond the image alts and consider some additional image elements using real world PSA examples. In each PSA example, we'll look at the image through the lens of a different type of disability, keeping in mind that simulators are tools and may not represent an individual's true experience. Yet by using such tools, we can begin to build some empathy into our designs and really consider the different ways our images are being consumed. Also, to be clear, the following examples are for illustrative and educational purposes only, and not meant to call out or otherwise pass judgment on the designs in question. So if you're sitting in the audience and I use yours as an example of ways to improve, don't be offended, please. It's just a way to like talk about accessibility. Also, there might be multiple issues in one PSA, but we're just going to focus on one issue per type, per example. So don't like write me an angry tweet later that says, hey, you missed this. Like, let's just focus on one at a time. But so I just kind of think of this as a way that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities for improvement in the area of digital communications, especially when all the dust settles on this COVID-19, and accessibility is just one more area to consider reviewing. So I'm not sure if anyone said anything in the chat, but this is avoid touching your face. It's an image of a person's hand with some long nails, and it looks like they've got straight pins glued to their hand and pointing outwards. So a little bit of a porcupine kind of effect. If my hand looked like that, I probably wouldn't touch it, so touch my face. All right, so moving on to color and contrast. The beating heart of design arguably is color. And if color is the heart, then contrast is the muscle. Without good color contrast levels in place, elements like words, icons, and other graphical shapes are hard to discern, and the design can quickly become inaccessible. But what happens when you perceive color and contrast differently than others? How does the same message come through? How do you reach people with color sensing issues like color blindness? It is estimated that over 300 million people worldwide are colorblind. So that's a lot of people and experiences to consider. But color and contrast also affects people with partial sight, older adults, and people in certain situations. I think we've all been in a situation where we've been in too much glare, right? The sun's out and we can't see anything. Or maybe the opposite, where it's really low lighting in a room and you can't read what's on the page. So the number of actual people you reach with accessible color and contrast is much higher. All right, first example here. This is a PSA that kicked it all off, right? And on social media, I saw that the one in the bottom right corner, it's like a kind of beigey one. I saw it on Twitter and I was just surprised. It's like, okay, this is the Ad Council and Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC. And this is the set of assets that they produce for higher risk individuals for COVID-19. These PSAs incorporate a variety of striking color choices and are visually appealing. I will admit that. But when testing against backgrounds, the text against the backgrounds in these images, many of the color combinations do not pass the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines color contrast ratio. This is true for the unedited version, which is what we're seeing now. For people without sight, what I'm showing are 6 PSAs. They vary between like teal and blue and like a salmon color and some like tan, right? There's text and then there's some graphics underneath. That's a short description there, but this is true even with the unedited version. So, but when we add the color blindness simulator and the low vision, the color contrast ratios get even worse. So that's just the regular one. This one is using the Chrome Lens extension. It includes a tool called the Lens Vision Simulator, and it transforms the colors on a website or a page to simulate what color blindness a colorblind person might see. And there's a lot of different variants, and this is a red-green color blindness. I'm not going to try to pronounce how to say it, but I can send you a link to that tool later. And this is a simulated PSA with red wheat color blindness. So again, people who are watching that aren't visual, what we have on the second one is some of the salmon turned to some of the blue turned into a purple and a lavender color, and then the salmon turned more into a lime green. And again, the tan is kind of the same. Whereas with the red wheat, we've got a darker blue and some light blue, like a sea blue, and then some kind of like tan and orangey colors that pop up. So definitely a different experience design-wise. And if we use the No Coffee Vision Simulator tool, we can see this PSA will look like to somebody with low vision, and the next one's with cataracts, but it's the same No Coffee Vision Simulator. So again, this is the original, and that's just kind of, everything looks a little bit more difficult to read. And the next one is the cataracts. So between the low vision is like it changes it, almost like the focus. If you're into photography, it's like the focus changes. It's like everything looks a little bit out of focus in this particular simulator. And the next one, the cataracts, everything's still pretty much in focus, but we have some orbs and other different discolorations that are in a random pattern on top of what we're seeing. So it hides some pieces of the PSAs. So let's now break down, don't take my word for it, let's like break these down and actually test some of the color contrast on these PSAs. So again, this is the unedited version. We want to strive for at least a 4.5 to 1. So again, this is text versus the background. That's for regular size text, 4.5 to 1. 3 to 1 if we have large size text or essential icons. So in this case, we're testing the word have and the word diabetes. And so the have and the diabetes are definitely above the 18 points. So I would want to see at least a 3-to-1 ratio on these original PSAs. And if we look at the example, we are not anywhere close to it. We got 1.26 to 1 and 1.86 to 1. So a little bit better with the tan, but still not anywhere close to 3. This is with the vision simulator, the red-green color blindness. The first one's really awful, 1.07 to 1 and 1.27 to 1. So pretty extreme. The next one's a little bit better, but it's still pretty awful, 1.15 to 1 and 1.52 to 1. So again, this is on the left side is the have, and on the right is the word diabetes. Oh, this is the red week, if I didn't mention that. All right, so looking at a different PSA, again, this is the original version. We're looking at the words undergoing and then the other cancer treatment. So the undergoing is a little bit darker. It's got a 1.33 to 1 ratio, whereas the other one is 1.99 to 1. So again, unedited version and not doing so well. Here is the low vision. So I kind of spot checked or spot kind of grab things that might be a little bit different if you test this one with on your own time. But we got 1.25 to 1 for low vision on the word undergoing, and for cancer treatment, we have 1.71 to 1. And again, same kind of thing, depending on where exactly you're sampling. For the cataracts, you get 1.06 to 1 and 1.85 to 1. So it's pretty, I think it's pretty obvious when you start running a color contrast analyzer kind of tool, a tool like that. There's a lot of really great resources out there. DQ has a tool as well. So there's a lot of different options. Just use one that works best for you. A lot of people blame color for their design and accessibility issues, but these last two examples, the low vision and the cataracts, also show how contrast plays a key role as well. Because I didn't change the colors on these last two PSAs, but I just changed the user perspective and I blurred or like obfuscated the text a bit. And so we can see the text on the images is much more difficult to read, even though the contrast ratios in some cases didn't change by much. To make these PSAs more accessible, as you might have guessed, we needed to bump up or increase the contrast on these images so people with color blindness, low vision, and other eye disorders could read the text. Some quick takeaways on color and contrast. I mean, it should be obvious. The first one you really 100% always should be doing is checking your contrast ratios, right? The WCAG has a great guideline. A lot of smart people have thought about, you know, what all of that means. But there's a lot of great tools and tests that you can use. There's palette generators as well. So no excuses on that one. Next, you know, think about making your background simple. So using solid backgrounds, avoiding things like overlays, textures, gradients. I'm not saying don't do anything exciting at all when it comes to design, but just choose and think about how that choice is going to impact people with low vision or color blindness. I mentioned the two extensions, the Chrome Lens and the No Coffee. Both of those are really great tools. Again, keeping in mind it's a simulator. It's not a real person, so it's only going to give you an approximation of like what is happening. Another big one, don't use color alone to convey information. I've seen things like contact information can be seen in red, or click the blue button to learn more. But if you can't see these colors, if you can't see blue, you can't see red, how would you know what to do with that in that situation? So just a good reminder there. All right, so moving on to typography and layout. In a perfect world, we would keep our text and our images separated, and this would allow users to manipulate typography and the layout in any way they'd want. Font sizing, letter spacing, kerning, justification, margins, padding, and so much more. But unfortunately, there's a lot of formats that this kind of separation, it's difficult or impossible, such as the aforementioned social media posts, emails, PDFs, pretty much any other fixed form media. So not a website or an app or something that would be based on code. It would be pretty flat. Typography is especially important to people who estimate the 15 to 20% of the world's population that has dyslexia. That's a learning disorder where certain letters, numbers, combinations of letters, it can be confusing, or maybe they look like they're flipped or move around. There's a lot of interesting research about what exactly someone with dyslexia would be experiencing. But like any disability, it's about the individual. So again, keep those in mind as well. But also people with low vision, attention deficit disorder, reading disabilities, or if you have something like, the complex layout is a real barrier for somebody who's got any of those disorders. They have trouble keeping their place, following the flow of the content due to the lack of white space and other clear linear pathways. So a lot of people are affected by typography layout. All right, so another cool example here, well, maybe not cool, but PSA example is from California's Long Beach Health and Human Services. And what we're looking at on the left is a PSA from an accessibility point of view. What typography and layout issues do you see? In what ways could we improve this image? I showed this to one person, they're like, oh, it looks great. And then I showed them the next couple slides and they changed their story. But if we focus on, again, just the typography and layout, the image on the left shows the unedited version, and the image on the right has one that I've kind of marked up. So the first thing we see are these red hand-drawn lines, and they're illustrating the multiple rivers of space, and that's caused by the justified alignment. So if we go back to the unedited one, we can see the justification has the font or the text spreading the full width of the paragraph. And that causes issues for people, again, attention disorders or people with vision disorders in general. If we look at the blue dotted boxes, what this is outlining is 6 different layout changes. So part of layout is that we want to be repeating some of the patterns. We don't want our users to kind of keep thinking and changing, the perspective, right? We want to have it something as consistent as possible, especially when we're talking about PSAs where people might already be a little bit stressed kind of in general. You don't want to make them work. The pink numbers, they're highlighting the 14 different typography treatments discovered, and that's ignoring the logo. So some of these changes are more obvious, like font family changes, or maybe there's some color changes, and some are more subtle, like alignment, size, weight, in the typography. And again, it's one of those like, why do we need 14 different versions of the same or different font on one page? Like, we might want to pare it down a little bit. Cognitive load might be a little bit too much there. And then I have these green question marks because not only do people with dyslexia, dyscalculia, I think is how you say it, but that's people also don't understand numbers. It's very similar to that. So it's like, if I give you an equation, what kind of additional, again, cognitive load am I giving to you? So what does this equation even mean? As somebody who doesn't have necessarily issues with math, but like I'm like a little bit confused about the purpose and the flow of this one. So I just kind of put a question mark. Maybe you're fine with it. It was a little more difficult for me. All right, and then one more here on this one, the black lines and dots. So this is like the expected 12 points of visual interest if we were doing like maybe a UX eye tracking test, and that's kind of based on the order of the content blocks. So in English speaking sites and content like this, we're talking about top to bottom, left to right. And in this case, we also have that equation. So we have X plus Y equals Z. So again, it's not necessarily that this is a bad PSA, but there are some definite barriers on some of these things. And again, this would take a little bit more time, a little bit more thought than something a little bit more streamlined. All right, that's everything all at once. Another PSA here, we have the Health of Prince George County in Maryland. We have the original PSA on the left, and it's very colorful. And again, if we're just focusing on typography and layout, we don't have any justification on this, which is great, but we do have 9 different layout changes. And again, what I'm considering a layout change is they're similar, but they're just different enough to be separate, their own entity. It's not like you're repeating a pattern. The placement of the text or the number or the icon or the size, something's different about it. So we've got, what do we have, 9. The green, so I had to make it green. The text on the other one was pink, but the pink didn't stand out, so I chose the green. The 11th is kind of hard to find. It's in number 4. It's got text on top of the image. It's the only one that has that. But again, we're highlighting 11 different typography treatments, ignoring the logos. Some are more obvious, like font family changes, the same sort of thing, alignment, size, or weight changes. So that's a lot. Another one is the black line. So expected 10 points of visual interest, in this case, a little bit less than the last one, in a simulated UX eye tracking test based on the order of the blocks. So in this case, we're going top to bottom, left to right, but we also had those numbers to play into it. So it kind of forces us to do like a little bit of a zigzag throughout the whole page. So we're scanning this whole image back and forth to actually get the information that we need. That's all of them together. All right, so far we've seen some examples where there's a lot of typography changes and layouts are pretty complex. Let's review a PSA that's a little bit cleaner. This one is the Prevention Action Alliance from Columbus. Blue dotted lines, again, those are outlining the 3 different layout changes. So in this particular case, we only have 3 changes, which is pretty small compared to the other ones. For the highlighting the 4 different typography treatments, again, ignoring the logos. In this case, we actually only had 1 font family that was used. The only variation was size, color, and weight. So it was very consistent. And as you might have expected with the black lines and dots here, we have 8 visual points of visual interest. It's pretty much top to bottom. It's so linear. It's the best linear example I've found. Very, very low cognitive load on and what order. I'm not forced to be going all over the place to figure something out. It's just top to bottom. So the third PSA example is more consistent when it comes to typography and layout than the other 2 we saw earlier. It has more overall white space. It obviously has that linear visual pathway compared to the first 2. So overall, a little bit more clean, a little bit more accessible and inclusive. Less is more when it comes to accessible typography. So you want to limit the number of different font families, variations such as italic, bold, all caps, that sort of thing. The research is not conclusive whether or not serif or sans serif typefaces are easier to read. If you choose a font family that have clearly defined letter shapes, that's a little bit more important. So I'm always looking for things like the capital I in India, the lowercase l in like lettuce, and the number 1. Likewise, characters like B and D, P and Q. I've also seen a lot B and the number 8. They all look similar. So you want to make sure that those are all well defined. When it comes to layout, less is also more. Repeating the patterns as we saw in that last PSA, and avoiding paragraph alignment, which creates that white space or those rivers of space that we saw in the first one. We want to be considerate those kind of things, line spacing, paragraph spacing. There's some really great guidelines on that in the WCAG department as well. So take a look at those. All right, last but not least, let's focus on the actual message of the PSA. Arguably, the copy is the key element, informing the public about the latest updates for COVID-19 specifically, and providing information about the prevention of the spread of the virus. But the icons in this situation serve up more than just decoration. These visual elements repeat the same message as the copy. So a lot of weight to these, both the copy and the icons. People, again, with attention deficit disorders, we're talking about 129 million people worldwide. They can have issues focusing on copy that's too long, too complex, does not break items into lists, lacks white space. Likewise, people with cognitive, language, and learning disabilities, they may need visual icons or graphics and symbols to help understand the copy that's with it. All right, kind of going a little bit fast through this next one so we can get to some Q&A, but I knew this would happen. Sorry, I talk a little bit too much sometimes when I'm excited, but all right, so this example, we're showing 2 different PSA from the CDC. And what we're going to look at is they essentially have similar information, but one has a lot of text and little tiny icons, and the other one on the right is a lot more graphical. It's big. It's only got a few sentences for everything. So we're going to test the readability or the ease at which a reader can understand the written text on this with a tool. So again, this is the first one. Even the title is really long. What you should know about COVID-19 to protect yourself and others. So if we evaluate the main body copy, ignoring like the logos and things like that, and use tools like the readable or the readability test, we see that the PSA has 388 words and a grade level about 9, yep, and a Fleisch-Kincaid reading ease of 64.6. So just so you know, the reading ease is out of 100. The lower the number, the more difficult the copy is to read. And for reference, like a reading ease score of 60 to 70 is about what you want for like web copy. So it's right in the ballpark of 60 to 70, so that's great. And the grade, it's great. But we also have 35 complex words and over 9% of complex words within that text. So it definitely, the first one was great. It's adequate, it falls in the suggested readability ranges, but I think we could do better. So I tested this one. A lot more imagery, a lot less text. So again, if we evaluate the main copy, we see our copy now has a total of 90 words, average grade level of 6, and a Fleisch-Kincaid reading ease of 83.6. So closer to 100 is great. Complex words went all the way down to 4, with only a 4% throughout the whole body. So compared to the first PSA, we have 298 fewer words. It's easier to read by at least 3 grade levels, has a reading ease increase of 19 points, and overall is just less complex. So based on these numbers, we can kind of extrapolate that the second PSA could be more inclusive than the first if we look at just the readability. But testing the readability of copy isn't the only way to measure effectiveness of a PSA when it comes to message accessibility. Another element we need to look at are the icons that accompany the copy. So if we're presented only the icons, is the same message received? Let's look at a couple examples. So this first one is the European Cyclist Federation, and I've covered over the text. So right now we can only really see the icon text. We can see the header. But based on the icons alone, what is the message of the image is trying to convey about riding your bicycle safely during COVID-19? And I tested this on a few people. A lot of people got the bottom middle one correct, that's social distancing. But the other ones were kind of a bit of a hodgepodge. So let me show you what we got. The first one is like an eye in a circle, and it says seek government advice. The next one's a check in a circle, and it says check your bicycle before you start pedaling. The next ones are 2 hands raised up, like yay. Wash your hands. A lot of people didn't understand that one. A hand, only a hand, don't touch your face during the ride. That was confusing to a lot of people. Social distancing, obviously, is the middle one. And then the last one, nobody got. Take the most direct and safest route available. It's just an arrow. Kind of wondering, we have too many people to have the conversation about this, but I'm wondering if you guys were able to figure out the full message when that text was covered. I'm guessing that you could probably guess correctly on a couple icons, but were there parts of the message that you missed because you didn't have the copy? This one's a lot more cleaner here, or more clean. This is from the Pennsylvania Department of Health. When I was doing this research, Pennsylvania Department of Health has a lot of really great PSAs, really great icons, and I was really impressed. Like each one was great. So this is just one of the many that they have. So again, I tested this on people with different ages, even my kids, and they got most of them right. They were a little bit confused between that top third one and the bottom first one. So it's medications and first aid. A lot of people weren't sure which one was which, but it's a lot more clear, right? Because we're using icons that are more directly related to the text underneath it. A couple more just because they're fun. But what if your message is one big icon? Like here's one we see, and this is an edited PSA from Canva, And it's sourcing the World Health Organization, or WHO, for its message. So what is the message, right? And to be honest, when I first saw this, I thought this was like a PSA on bullying, not realizing that the man on the bottom left was also the man in the middle of the group of the right. That's like the same person. They changed the clothes and put on some sunglasses, and all of a sudden I was confused. But the PSA is stay away from mass gatherings, right? This is also one of my favorites. It's Essential American PSA from the Biologists for Nature in Guatemala. And you can see here 2 people and some animal in between, and then arrows with the words 2 meters. And even if you don't know Spanish fluently, I think you can kind of get that what it's trying to say is you need to stay at least this far away from somebody else. The English or translation here is, if you encounter each other in the street and you don't know the proper social distance, the text reads in Spanish, imagine there's a Central American tapir between you and the other person. Thought that was kind of fun. But one more that's for more American audiences. We have 6 feet and we have a bicycle in between 2 people. I have the text covered up, but as you might imagine, it's just stay 6 feet away from each other. All right, so some takeaways here for accessible copy and icons. Be clear and concise. The unofficial rules to write for like a 9th grade level. This is based on the assumption that most people will reach 12th grade reading level, but in times of peak stress, they might not be reading at their highest level. So that's kind of where that came from. Try to use plain language, avoid technical jargon, fancy words, expressions, etc. If you do need to use some more complex words, make sure that you have a way to explain them in more detail someplace. Using tools like Readable, Readability Test, Hemingway, Grammarly, there's a bunch of them. They can give you suggestions to make your copy more inclusive and also determine the reading level. Using icons, graphs, and symbols to supplement copy whenever possible. So adding the imagery allows you to break down some of those language barriers like we saw with the tapir, but also cognitive barriers where you just don't really want to think about it or you can't think about it for one more minute. So that really helps your typography and gives it a little bit of a break from carrying all the weight. So that way, if you maybe chose a font family or style that somebody had difficulty reading, they could actually look at the icon and kind of get the idea of what you're talking about. Just make sure that you choose icons that are common and don't require a lot of thought, like on the European bicycle example. So creating accessible images involves a lot more than just adding alt text. It's really important that we consider how all image elements, color, contrast, typography, layout, copy, icons affect your users as well. So by taking a little bit more time and building these accessibility principles into your images, you will undoubtedly reach more people and on their terms. So in uncertain times like these, especially, we need to make sure we are addressing all the ways we can improve our images and be more inclusive in our messaging. And I love this quote from George Day. He's an expert on inclusion. Inclusion is not bringing people into what already exists. It is making a new space, a better space for everyone. Thanks, and that's it. There's me, or there's DQ, contact. There is me, contact, and questions. Sorry, Laura, I went a little bit late.
No worries, that's a lot of really great content you had there. Lots of really good feedback so far in the chat and in the questions. Cool. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in and give you some of the questions. Let me find one here. So Mike is asking that he's heard that it's redundant or unimportant to put the word logo in as alt text instead of DQ logo. Mm-hmm. Is this true?
It's true and not true. Like, I don't necessarily think that you need the word logo. It's kind of personal preference. I mean, most times I see people say, if it's an action, let's say if it's like a logo, but it's also a home button, it'll say something to that effect, right? So DQ home, or you wouldn't necessarily say DQ logo home, but it's not wrong either. So again, it gets down to that personal preference, and plus people who are consuming that information from assistive technology device perspective, they may want to hear that it's the logo, or they might already kind of like all things on the web, like there's patterns, right? Usually the logo's in the top left. It's one of the first things you hear, right? So I feel like you kind of get used to hearing certain things too. So even if it didn't say logo, they would probably infer that it was.
Got it. Thanks. Another question here. What size of text is considered a large text?
For the purposes of WCAG guidelines and that sort of thing, I believe it's 18 points and higher, but you could, if you have 14 and it's bolded, then it would push it up into that large text size. Since I don't have the actual assets from the PSA, I'm thinking of the PSA from the CDC and the Ad Council, the first one we saw. I'm estimating that it's over 18 points. It probably is, but I'd want to like actually test that if I had the real asset to give them the best choice. But I think part of that question also becomes, what does that PSA look like when it's in its context, right? So the first time I saw that one, it was on Twitter in a little, a little image on a Twitter on my phone. And so it was big, but it was at 18 points big, right? So there's some contextual information I think you'd have to like test and kind of think about a little bit more. But hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, I think that was a really good answer. Another question here. Is it better to use a single font family for a design for accessibility's sake?
So I think when I talk to designers, they get kind of terrified when it comes to accessibility because they think of it as restrictions. And I don't like to think about it like that. I think about it as more of a design challenge, right? So I wouldn't say ever, this is the way to do anything, really. Maybe don't use Comic Sans or something like that. Maybe don't do that. Or Papyrus, right? But not all joking aside, you don't necessarily have to stick to one font. You could have a couple fonts. But in the case of the first PSA, like we were talking about typography and layout, I think there was like 13 or 14 different treatments. So not only are we talking about font family changes, but like weight, color, size, spacing, justification. It was just a lot, right? It didn't need to be that complex. You saw on that third example, when it was like the more linear one, I think that was the Columbus one, Columbus, Ohio. I like that one because they were only using one font family, but it was probably not necessarily obvious to everyone. It was just one font family because of the way that they gave it different treatments. They gave it a little bit more bold for the important parts, or at the bottom when it's just talking about like a URL, it's a little bit lighter, right? But it still had enough variation to be interesting without overwhelming the senses with multiple things going on, multiple font families and weights and all that kind of stuff when it comes to typography. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Another good one here. So what was the name of the testing site you were using for doing the readability score?
So one of them was literally called Readability. The other one was the Readable test. I think I'll send the links out to Laura. Maybe she can add that with whatever response that she has.
Yeah, definitely. I'll include that in the follow-up email we send out. With the
but it's based on a formula. So I think really any online tool that you can find. I like the Hemingway app for when I write because it just kind of gives me some information, not only about grade level, but it also kind of gives me some grammar hints as well. So it's just personal preference, but I think, again, all of them are really based on formulas. So they all should be following that pretty strictly.
Perfect, thanks. Another good question here. So a lot of the PSA examples that you showed were copy heavy. As they stand, how would you handle accessibility for screen reader users if that was an image, as that would be way too much for alternative text?
Yeah, I think I talked to somebody offline about that at one point earlier in the week or last week or something. Who knows? The days are all weird now. But we had this conversation because, again, a lot of times we focus on the alt, but that is important, obviously, to a huge amount of people. So we want to make sure we get that right. So in that context, like if I am showing that as part of, let's say, a social media blast or something, I'd have this image and it's heavy text. I would want to include something like a link or something to actually go to the page that explains the information that you're trying to convey in more detail. But if you're on like a website or an app, you could already be doing that, right? So you have, I see that a lot with infographics, right? It's very complex. It maybe has formulas or something to like that you, it's really hard to explain in 150 characters, which it sounds like this might be in that realm. You would want to explain it in the HTML, or you could make it visual, like I said, to everybody, or you could hide it and just show it to your screen reader users. If you're using an SVG, there's the long text description, the ARIA labeled by, connecting to the for and all that. So there's a lot of different techniques to show or hide that information. But definitely, if you think there's too much text on your flyer, first of all, I'd kind of question, like, do you need that much text? But if you decided you actually did, then you'd want to make sure that that is somewhere in programmatically discernible way that somebody with an AT device could get to. Otherwise, it's hidden from them, and obviously you don't want them to not know that information. So yeah, so I think it depends on the context, I guess, is the long short of that, but there's a lot of different methods for doing that.
Perfect, thank you. In case you aren't able to, oh, I see the question now. So how do we get around the character limit in the alt text field in certain technologies, especially for complicated images that require detailed explanations?
Yeah, I mean, similar to like what I just said, like the 150 is kind of a rule of thumb. I actually don't know that screen readers, well, they probably eventually have a cap, but some of them I've heard don't really have much of a cap. Like if you wrote a paragraph, it could technically read it, but would someone actually sit through that is the question, right? I'm not sure. I'm not sure they would. So that 150 is kind of a cap for both, to avoid things like keyword stuffing and black hat SEO practices and things like that. That's part of it. Google PageRank, I don't know if they factor that into it. If you have a gigantic alt, what they would do to that. I would imagine maybe they'd penalize it, or at least, tell you like, hey, you can make this a little bit better. But if you need that much to describe what's going on in the image, there are a lot of different methods, and you should be utilizing one of those other ones, because 150 is already a lot of characters. It could be 2 sentences, right? 2 or 3 sentences. So depending on obviously the length and the complexity of the words, but like 150 characters is actually pretty long as it is. So I would suggest maybe using one of the other methods that we talked about, like the HTML. You can make it visually hidden or visually visible to everybody, right? So there's a lot of different ways. Or again, if you're using SVG, SVG is scale vector graphics. So essentially it's like a visual representation of code. There's a lot more you could do with that under the hood, right? There's a lot of information that you could kind of plug into that kind of image type.
Another question here. So I heard that there are fonts specifically for dyslexia. Is this true? And I know you touched on this a little bit, but just as a follow-up.
Sure, yeah. No, there are fonts for dyslexia. Would I recommend you using those? No. And the reason why is, I shouldn't say that so definitively, but it seems like the research that people have done about these fonts, they have content and they have it in this dyslexic font, and then they have it without, they have it in like an Arial or something that is familiar. And people with dyslexia tend to prefer the Arial. And the reason the researchers think that is that because they've already learned the patterns of a font family they're already accustomed to. So again, maybe Times New Roman, Arial, Open Sans, Roboto probably by this time. But it's not necessarily that even those are even more accessible fonts. It's that they have encountered them so many times that they've learned kind of patterns and tricks to read them, if that makes sense, right? And so for them, they hadn't encountered the dyslexia type fonts as often as they had, encountered Arial, for instance. And so they didn't have necessarily those patterns. But again, it's all about individual. I could say this and then someone could come back and be like, oh no, that's my favorite font family of all. And that's great. And that's why we have things like customized style sheets, and why we want people to put like Instead of text on images on a website, we want it to be HTML. So then I could apply that font family to your page and make it a better experience for myself. Because ultimately, I think what all of these things are about is user choice, right? I can't tell you what's going to be best for everybody. I can tell you some of the guidelines, some of the things that are happening out there in the world, but ultimately it's about that user themselves and giving them that choice and that ability to make those changes if they need them.
Great, thanks, Carrie. And we've now come to the end of
Awesome.
our time today for the webinar, so perfect timing. I'll make sure to send Carrie all the questions we didn't have time for so she can follow up offline. So if we didn't get your question, don't worry. And as a friendly reminder, I'll be sending a follow-up email with all the tools that Carrie was using today, the slides, the recording, and the transcript. So keep an eye out for that. That email will come from me. And again, Carrie, great job, fantastic content, and I hope everybody has a great rest of their afternoon.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate the time.